I started 3 years ago at Trust in Scotland.
What happened in Bond girl auditions would shock most people today. Women walked into rooms expecting professional meetings. Instead, they faced demands that crossed every boundary. Some were handed what looked like pieces of string and told to strip down to their underwear. This wasn't for the role. This was just to audition. Every woman had to fit exact measurements. Hair growth was tracked. Nail polish was banned. Makeup had to look effortless. They were requirements that shaped careers and destroyed dreams. The real story reveals a system designed to control every detail of a woman's body and life. The Bond franchise has always carried an image of glamour, but behind the camera, the standards for Bond girls were far stricter and often harmful. Many people assume beauty just meant a stylish dress and perfect makeup, yet the reality was a checklist so precise that even today's modeling rules seem lenient by comparison. From 1962 onward, casting calls asked for women between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 11 inches tall. No shorter, no taller. Fitness alone was not enough. They were expected to appear impossibly slim, with precise curves and waists so small that costumes had to be tailored to fit their bodies exactly. Martine Beswick, who appeared in From Russia with Love and Thunderball, had to maintain her 5 feet 7 inch height and 125-pound weight, with measurements of 34 to 35 inches. Producers checked these numbers closely, and even a gain of a few pounds could mean losing the part before filming began. The pressure created consequences that went far beyond the screen. Bond girl hopefuls recalled weekly weigh-ins where even a minor change in their body could cost them the role. Some were reminded that Hollywood was full of thinner, prettier replacements waiting in line. This constant threat drove many women into dangerous habits. There were reports of eating disorders and diets that barely provided enough food to stay healthy. British model Amanda Curlin admitted she was measured every week during casting, knowing that if she ever crossed her approved weight, her chance at a career in Hollywood could disappear overnight. The toll was not only physical. Many women described living in a constant state of anxiety, convinced that one extra meal or a missed workout could end their dreams. The rules extended even to details that might seem trivial. Hair was logged by stylists who tracked growth, dye jobs, and split ends. Makeup artists were ordered to keep the look natural, avoiding heavy products because producers wanted a beauty that appeared effortless. Even fingernails were controlled. Bond girls were not allowed to wear nail polish and had to keep their nails short to fit the athletic image demanded by the franchise. Age was another hidden barrier. Jane Seymour was chosen as Solitaire at just 20 years old because producers said they were looking for a virginal type. Casting records show that women between 21 and 45 were considered, though most were preferred to be under 25. The message was clear. Actresses had to match not only physical measurements, but also the fantasy image producers wanted for each film. And no matter how famous a Bond girl became, she knew she was always one birthday, 1 pound, or one bad hair day away from being replaced. The darker side of casting went even further than measurements and diets. Audition rooms often demanded a level of vulnerability that shocked those who walked in. Rosamund Pike, cast as Miranda Frost in 2002's Die Another Day, was only 21 when she faced an experience she later described as humiliating. She arrived in a glamorous gown she had carefully chosen, hoping to look professional. But the costume designer handed her what she described as 3 pieces of string and told her to unzip and drop her dress so she could stand in her underwear before the casting team. She had not even been given the role yet. Pike refused, saying calmly that she would do that only if she got the part, not during an audition. Against the odds, she still won the role. Her story was not unique. Many actresses reported that Bond auditions often required them to strip down with little warning in front of mostly male decision-makers. The demand to appear sexy began long before filming ever started. For Pike, the risk was even greater. An audition tape could have been copied and shared across Hollywood, stripping away her privacy and dignity. What she faced was not simply about acting, but about proving her worth by exposing her body to strangers. Pike has since spoken about how producer Barbara Broccoli ran the set with respect, ensuring no actress felt unsafe once filming began. She said she was grateful for that environment. Yet the fact that the first step of the process had left her feeling vulnerable and out of her depth remains hard to overlook. Her refusal to comply and the success that followed became a quiet act of defiance in a franchise long criticized for how it treated women. One of the most surprising facts about the James Bond films is the strict rule around the voices of the Bond girls. Producers didn't just focus on how the actresses looked, they often decided their real voices were not suitable and replaced them through dubbing, sometimes in ways that felt harsh. The best example is Nikki van der Zyl, a German actress living in the UK, whose voice was secretly used for more than 13 Bond girls across 10 films. She started with the very first Bond movie, Dr. No, in 1962, and continued through to Moonraker in 1979. Van der Zyl gave her voice to some of the most famous Bond girls. She replaced Ursula Andress as Honey Rider, Shirley Eaton as Jill Masterson, Claudine Auger as Domino, and even partly covered Jane Seymour as Solitaire. When Ursula Andress walked out of the sea in her white bikini in Dr. No, it wasn't her Swiss-German accent that audiences heard, but Van der Zyl's carefully polished mid-Atlantic English. She even sang "Underneath the Mango Tree" for Andress in the beach scene. For all this work in Dr. No, she was paid only $25. Even though the film became a worldwide success. The dubbing wasn't limited to women with foreign accents. Producers wanted all Bond girls to share a certain sound, so they sometimes dubbed native English speakers too. In Dr. No, Van der Zyl also voiced Eunice Gayson's character, Sylvia Trench, because her natural upper-class accent was judged too posh. The idea was to create a voice that felt both exotic and familiar to British and American audiences. Scholars later called this cultural ventriloquism, since the same woman's voice was used for characters of many different nationalities, giving them a false but uniform identity. Despite her huge contribution, Van der Zyl was never given public credit. She was often excluded from official Bond events, and in one case she was told her presence could embarrass the stars whose voices she had replaced. When she wrote her autobiography, Roger Moore originally agreed to write the foreword, but his team withdrew it at the last minute due to what they called sensitivities about dubbing. For decades, audiences had no idea whose voice they were hearing. It wasn't until editor Norman Wanstall later confirmed the truth that fans realized many of their favorite Bond girls had never been heard in their own voices. The men of Bond faced similar pressure. Producers demanded that every Bond actor use a version of received pronunciation, the upper-class British accent. Sean Connery had to work hard to soften his Scottish sound, and George Lazenby, an Australian, took special elocution lessons to meet the standard. This created a strange world where almost every important character, no matter their nationality, spoke in the same polished style chosen for sex appeal and elegance. The story of Bond girls' wardrobes is one of the most fascinating and controversial parts of movie history. It all began with Ursula Andress in Dr. No in 1962, when she walked out of the ocean in a white bikini that changed cinema forever. The sight of her, sun-kissed and carrying a knife in a custom sheath on her hip, shocked audiences who had never seen anything so daring on the big screen. That single scene made headlines across the world and sent bikini sales soaring. Women everywhere wanted to own a two-piece like hers, and the outfit itself became legendary. Andress later found it stored away in her attic and sold it at auction in 2001 for $41,125, which was more than $60,000 at the time. Nearly 2 decades later, it went back on the market with an asking price of up to $500,000. The bikini was more than just a costume. It was a symbol that made the two-piece acceptable in mainstream fashion, even in countries where it had still been considered controversial. In 2003, the moment was crowned the #1 greatest sexy moment on UK television, proving just how much of a cultural mark it had left. The push for unforgettable entrances didn't end there. Every Bond girl who followed faced the same pressure to deliver that same shock and allure. Evening gowns were cut low and split high, designed to show as much as possible while still staying just inside the boundaries of what could be shown on screen. The goal wasn't subtle. These dresses were created to appeal to the fantasies producers believed the audience expected. For the actresses, that meant long hours in fittings and costumes that often left little room for comfort. Jane Seymour, playing the mysterious Solitaire, wore 10 different outfits in a single film. Each one was tailored to highlight her figure and maintain the tradition of unforgettable entrances. By the time Halle Berry stepped out of the ocean in her bright orange bikini in Another Day in 2002, it was clear the producers were deliberately echoing Ursula Andress's original moment. Even the details behind the costumes tell their own story. That famous first bikini was not designed in a high-end studio. It was made from Andress's own bra, covered in ivory cotton, with a knife scabbard added to give her character an edge of danger. Nothing was accidental. Every stitch, every strap, was meant to balance glamour with a sense of risk. These costumes didn't just create iconic scenes. They shaped how women dressed for years to come. But behind the glamour was a reality that was far less comfortable. Actresses admitted the rules were strict, sometimes humiliating, and often left them with little choice if they wanted to keep their place in one of the biggest film franchises in the world. For many, the exposure built careers. For Ursula Andress, it was the single moment that made her a star. Yet the cost of that stardom was living up to standards set not by art, but by the demands of producers and the expectations of millions watching from their seats. The physical demands placed on Bond girls were far more intense than most people realize. Their routines could rival those of professional athletes. Ana de Armas, who played CIA agent Paloma in No Time to Die in 2021, trained for as long as 5 hours a day. Her mornings were filled with non-stop physical work that included gun training, knife choreography, and complex fight sequences. She explained that the process was exhausting, with sessions running from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. On weekends, she added extra time at the shooting range to make sure every move on screen looked perfect. On top of that, she learned choreography so detailed, it felt more like dancing than fighting. She also chose to perform most of her own stunts, refusing a double, because she wanted the action to feel real. Halle Berry faced a similar challenge when she took on the role of Jinx in Die Another Day in 2002. To prepare, she followed a strict ketogenic diet that allowed fewer than 50 grams of carbohydrates a day. Her training was just as demanding, mixing yoga, martial arts, sprinting, and resistance band workouts. When time on set was tight, she added short but intense routines she called lunch crunch workouts, designed to push her body to the limit in just 10 minutes. Her trainer, Peter Lee Thomas, often worked with her to keep her at peak fitness. The pressure didn't stop once filming wrapped. She had to maintain the same level of readiness for reshoots, interviews, and unexpected film requests. It wasn't just a role for her, it became a lifestyle. Other Bond actresses went through their own grueling regimens. Denise Richards relied on daily Pilates, while Eva Green admitted her contract required her to run every day and stick to a diet of steamed or raw organic vegetables. Some insiders have even claimed that producers threatened to cut actresses from films if they missed their target weight by just a few pounds. One production was rumored to have replaced a Bond girl altogether because her appearance didn't match what the franchise demanded. The James Bond franchise had a reputation for making life difficult for its so-called Bond girls, especially when it came to their personal lives. The rules were strict, and sometimes they crossed into the bizarre. The most shocking one was about romance. Any serious relationship outside the films was not just frowned upon, but often suppressed. The producers believed that to keep Bond's image as the ultimate bachelor alive, the women he romanced on screen had to seem unattached and mysterious in real life as well. Actresses were warned not to be seen in public with steady partners, and certainly not with men who might break the fantasy for audiences. Ursula Andress, remembered as the very first Bond girl, revealed that when she fell in love with French actor Jean-Paul Belmondo during the promotion of Dr. No in 1962, she was pressured to hide her feelings. Public displays of affection were discouraged because they might break the spell for Bond fans. The effort to maintain this mystique went far beyond public appearances. At one point, scriptwriters even suggested allowing Bond to finally share a real romance with Miss Moneypenny, the MI6 secretary, who had flirted with him for over 5 decades. The idea was floated for the 2019 Daniel Craig film as a way to modernize their long-running dynamic. But Barbara Broccoli, the franchise's executive producer, shut it down immediately. She insisted that Bond could never end up with Moneypenny, saying bluntly, "Bond will not bed Moneypenny." To her, it would ruin one of the oldest and most profitable teases in the series. This rule held firm for 55 years, no matter how many writers tried to change it, proving just how determined the franchise was to keep Bond and those around him free from any true attachment. For the women cast in these roles, the restrictions could feel suffocating. Some described the off-screen experience as dreadful and stifling. One actress said she gave up acting altogether because she couldn't bear the pressure again. She explained that the demands went beyond acting. She was expected to avoid certain relationships, dress in carefully chosen ways, and maintain an aura of constant availability. It was a lifestyle that left her with little sense of freedom. Stories also circulated of producers quietly discouraging actresses from dating crew members or forming lasting relationships during filming. A Bond girl who ignored these expectations risked gossip, scandal, and even damage to her career. The so-called Bond girl curse didn't stop there. The media, often guided by producers and publicists, spun stories about failed romances and heartbreaks, ensuring that the image of Bond's women stayed consistent with the fantasy. Some actresses were even handed talking points for interviews, with clear instructions about what they could and couldn't say about boyfriends or families. Many were told to mention only close friendships and to steer away from anything that hinted at serious romance. Following these strange rules was the only way to keep the glamorous Bond girl image alive. It was a system that lasted for decades, designed to protect the myth of James Bond as the man every woman wanted, but no one could truly have. The rules for smoking and beauty in the James Bond films tell a surprising story about control, image-making, and how much risk filmmakers were willing to take. In the 1960s, James Bond himself smoked in 83% of his films, usually within the first 20 minutes. Yet the women around him were treated very differently. In Ian Fleming's books, women who smoked were sometimes looked down on. The films took that idea even further, often leaving cigarettes to villains or so-called bad girls. By the 1980s, the health debate over smoking was impossible to ignore. Surgeon General warnings appeared on screen, and studies showed teenagers who saw characters smoking in movies were twice as likely to pick up the habit themselves. Filmmakers became careful about what they showed, but contradictions remained. Bond stubbed out his last cigarette in 2002's Die Another Day. Still, many of his partners kept lighting up, sometimes in ways that shock viewers today. A 2017 study even noted that Bond was repeatedly exposed to secondhand smoke after love scenes, with one woman going so far as to use an ashtray on his bare chest. Public health experts later called the franchise problematic, pointing to an estimated 261 million tobacco impressions delivered to young U.S. viewers from the 2015 release of Spectre alone. Villainous women were the most likely to smoke, their cigarettes serving as a sign they were dangerous. Fiona Volpe in Thunderball became an unforgettable example. She seduced Bond, tried to kill him, and always seemed to have a cigarette in hand. Decades later, The World Is Not Enough opened with an assassin known as Cigar Girl, making her very first impression with a cigar. Money added another layer to the story. In 1989's License to Kill, the producers accepted a $350,000 payment from Lark Cigarettes for on-screen placement, even though, by then, it was already controversial to pay actors to smoke. The control didn't end with cigarettes. Bond girls faced rules about how they looked that were just as strict. When Skyfall was released in 2012, makeup artist Naomi Dawn explained that the entire look of actress Berenice Marlowe, who played Severine, was designed like armor. Her smoky, dragon-like eyes weren't simply a style choice. They were meant to show that the character hid her vulnerability behind carefully crafted beauty. Later, When Severine appeared without that makeup, her sudden weakness felt sharper for the audience. Dawn relied on black NARS eyeshadow, Chantecaille glosses, and a sparkling Chantecaille crystalline gloss for the sultry, wet look that became one of Severine's most talked-about features. Every detail required hours of touch-ups, from each eyelash to the precise curve of her eyeliner. Nail polish was treated like a branding weapon. OPI even partnered with the Bond franchise to release entire collections of shades inspired by the films. For Severine's casino scene, her nails were painted a rich maroon color named Skyfall, with shimmering gold underneath, a nod to her mysterious and dangerous world. The company later released a special edition 18K gold leaf top coat called The Man with the Golden Gun, which sold for nearly $80 in a gold container designed to be collected. The shades quickly became fan favorites and collectibles, with more than a dozen different colors tied to Bond films and characters by 2012. Hair was no less important. Whether a Bond girl wore tumbling curls, a perfect updo, or a bold pixie cut, it had to look flawless even in the middle of chase scenes. Berenice Marlowe's half-up, curled ponytail in Skyfall became so popular that tutorials for it went viral online, though it required exact curling irons and heavy amounts of product. In earlier decades, contracts sometimes dictated the exact length and color of an actress's hair. Stylists could be scolded if even one strand looked out of place. When an actress's own hair didn't meet the strict standard, wigs costing thousands of dollars were created to match the producer's vision. The Bond girl curse is one of Hollywood's strangest traps. On the surface, it looks like the role of a lifetime. You land a part in a James Bond movie, the world knows your name overnight, and your face is suddenly on posters everywhere. But for many of these women, the glamour ended as soon as the red carpet was rolled up. The very thing that gave them fame also closed doors, leaving them stuck with a label they couldn't shake. Luciana Paluzzi learned this the hard way. She played the villain Fiona Volpe in Thunderball in 1965, a film that became a massive success. She thought the role would launch her into serious work back in Italy, with directors like Fellini and Antonioni. Instead, she found herself shut out. To do a Bond picture is a blessing, but it's also a curse, she admitted. When I went back to Italy, the Fellinis, Antonionis, and Viscontis wanted nothing to do with me. Just one role, and suddenly she was seen as nothing more than a pretty face. Martine Beswick faced a similar struggle. She had appeared in From Russia with Love in 1963 and again in Thunderball. While the roles brought her instant recognition, they also trapped her. Hollywood and beyond saw her as eye candy, not a serious actress, and she soon realized that the Bond spotlight could also act like a cage. Even decades later, the curse didn't fade. Berenice Marlowe, who starred in Skyfall in 2012, found herself struggling to land big projects after her Bond role. Isabella Scorupco, who played Natalie Simonova in GoldenEye in 1995, faced her own setback. She turned down leading roles in blockbuster hits like The Mask of Zorro and LA Confidential. What looked like a smart career move backfired, and soon she was forced to rely on smaller projects. At one point, she even published a book reflecting on her Bond fame, almost as if trying to hold on to the recognition that had slipped away. Rosamund Pike's experience showed another side of the curse. She played Miranda Frost in Die Another Day in 2002, when she was just 23. Suddenly, everyone knew who she was, but not for the reasons she hoped. Having done the Bond film and been really overexposed, I was known by everybody, but respected by none, she explained. The attention often felt shallow and frustrating. Pike remembered riding the London Underground when teenage boys would shout out that she was the Bond girl. At times, she even denied it, just to avoid the label. Later, she admitted, "Sometimes it irks when people come up in the street and say, 'Oh, I'm a huge James Bond fan,' when you obviously want them to be a fan of your work in particular." What made the Bond girl curse so cruel was the paradox it created. These women gained international stardom overnight, yet the same role left them boxed in, typecast, or even dismissed. Hollywood struggled to see them as anything beyond their Bond character, and audiences couldn't separate the actress from the role. A few, like Rosamund Pike, managed to break free, but many others were left with careers that never recovered. For all its glamour, The Bond girl legacy became a cautionary tale that showed how the brightest spotlight could cast the darkest shadow. The role of Bond girls has changed a lot in recent years. Much of this shift came after Barbara Broccoli took charge of the franchise in 1996, following her father's death. She became the key producer, and under her leadership, the way women were shown in the films started to reflect new attitudes about gender and feminism. A big turning point came with costume designer Gianni Tamime, who worked on Skyfall in 2012 and Spectre in 2015. She said she wanted the women to wear clothes they would actually choose in real life, not outfits meant only to please the male gaze. This was a major change from how things were handled before. From the 1960s through the 1990s, Bond girls were forced to meet very strict beauty standards. Actresses were expected to be about 5 feet 7 inches or shorter, so they would not appear taller than Bond. In the Daniel Craig era, brunettes were often preferred. Their wardrobe was usually created with one goal: to be as sexualized as possible. Some actresses said they even felt pressure to wear revealing clothes during auditions. In 2002, Rosamund Pike recalled being asked to strip down to her underwear for her first audition for Die Another Day. She refused, saying she would only do that if she actually got the part. Even so, she was still offered the role. Looking back, she described the situation as humiliating. The difference between then and now is striking. Pike also remembered being shown nothing but a handful of string and being told it was more appropriate for Bond than the evening dress she had worn. She admitted she felt out of her depth. Stories like hers showed how common it was for actresses to be placed in uncomfortable and demeaning situations. Even into the 21st century, women reported experiences of what they called forced stripping and a general lack of respect during casting. Talent often seemed secondary to how well an actress could quietly comply. Things changed once Broccoli and Tamime made their mark. Tamime chose dresses from respected ready-to-wear collections and focused on matching the wardrobe to a character's personality instead of just a fantasy image. She explained that the goal was not to stop the women from looking attractive, but to add logic and comfort to their clothing so the outfits were ones real women might want to wear themselves. For the first time, choices about wardrobe and casting started to consider how the women felt, not only what the audience wanted to see. Still, many of the old rules remain. Bond girls today are still expected to meet certain beauty standards. They are almost always younger than Bond, always very attractive, and rarely taller than the leading man.